Hello, my friends. Today we're learning Daf Kuf. We're going to start from the Mishnah right at the top of the page. So before we start the Mishnah, we're just going to say that if someone buys with cash an item, so the transaction only really happens when you do Meshicha, when you pull the animal or the item. Therefore, the case of the Mishnah, discuss a suffix that we don't know when the baby of the cow was born, can't be talking about when you bought the item, because if you only paid cash, you could both go back on the transaction. And if you did the Meshicha, you see when was the baby born yet or not. That's why the Mishnah is talking about someone who swaps. And then if you swap a cow for a donkey, once you do Meshicha on the donkey, the cow, wherever it is, becomes the other person, and then you could have a suffix for the baby born before or after. Mashenkin by Avodim, money works. Once you give over money for Eved, the transaction tzchal. So once we know this, we could start the Mishnah. It says a Mishnah, Machlif bar b'chamoy, someone who swaps a cow for a donkey, b'yolda, and had a baby, and also someone who sold his woman slave and had a baby. The seller says the baby was born before I sold, and therefore it's mine. The buyer says no. Only after I bought it, the baby was born and it's mine. Says the Mishnah, you split the value of that baby. You had two slaves, one was big and one was cotton and one was small, and two fields, and one the big field. And one's a small field, the buyer says, I bought the big one. And the seller says, I don't know. The buyer gets the big one. The seller says, the small one I bought, the seller says I sold you the small one, and the buyer says, I don't know. He gets a small field, a small slave. If they argue, and he doesn't have to give only the cotton, and the Gemara is going to explain why this shvur. If they both don't know what the din, says the Mishnah, they split the difference between the small and the big one. Says the Gemara, why did we say when we have the suffix that we split up? Let's have a look. Where the baby is in the Shus Moicha or Shus Lekech. And the other one should be a Moitzi Mechaver Olav Raya. He has to bring a Raya. Why do we say Achloiku? It's talking about by the case of the cow, it's out where it's in the valley, so no one's muchzik. It's in a small alleyway, and no one's muchzik on the baby. So the Gemara, okay, we don't have chazaka, but let's have a morikama. And we know that the owner until now was the seller, so it should stay in the seller's rishus. So the Gemara, how money sumchusi? Our Mishnah is sumchus. The Omar, he holds Momana Mutal, but Safek Choikim, when you have a Seika de Mamayna, and we don't know who it belongs to, we split. Below Shvo. So the Gemara, Eimadoma sumchus, maybe this true. When did sumchus speak? B'Shema v'Shema. When the case of an ox who gored the cow, and we're not sure if he killed also the baby, or the baby was born before the goring dead. So they both don't know. Then he say Achloiku. Did Sumchus also say Achloiku when they both coming saying for sure, Betainas Bari? Omarava Baravuna in Sumchus afilu Bari. Yeah. And Ochanami Sumchus says it's Chiddush even by Bari, even though that's less of a svara to say it. Bishlema by Shema v'Shema, it makes sense. We don't know what to do. No one knows, so we split. But each one has Bari. L'chari should go after Chazaka or Morikama. So the Gemara that even by Bari Sumchus says it's Chiddush. Rava Omar loylum no. Ki Omar Sumchus Shema v'Shema. Aval Bari loy Omar. No, Sumchus only spoke about Shema v'Shema, not Bari. Oh, and our Mishnah L'char is Mashma Bari and Yisiach Loiku. We change the Mishnah a bit. V'toni, and we're going to learn the Mishnah. V'oim Shema ad shaloi mocharti, v'oim Shema mi shelokachti. Each one's Shema. We're changing the Mishnah, not that it's coming with a tiny Bari, they're coming with a tiny Shema, and that's why we say Achloiku. Said the Gemara, man, we learned in the Mishnah, later on in the Mishnah it says when they both don't know, the din is Yachloiku, Bishleim al Rava. who said that Sumchus only spoke by Shema v'Shema mid the Sefer Shema v'Shema, since clearly in the Sefer it's Umah Shema v'Shema Reish Nami v'Shema v'Shema. It's coming to tell you that the Reish is also Shema v'Shema. Elo l'Rabba bar Avhuna the Oma inoma Sumchus afilu bari bari, and the Reish is Tumah by bari bari, and afilu achlu Sumchus says yachloiku ashto bari v'bari. If already in the first case of the Mishnah, when they both come with a tainas bari, Omar yachloiku. So Shema v'Shema boy, why do we need the later case in the Mishnah to tell me by Shema v'Shema yachloiku? For sure yachloiku by Shema v'Shema if already by bari v'bari. Says the Gemara Mishumo, if this is a raya, lo area. It's no raya. Why? Tana Seifa liglu Reisha. In the Seifa it says Shema v'Shema to tell you that the Reisha is bari v'bari. Shloi toima Reisha Shema v'Shema to tell you you might, if it would only say the Reisha, you'd say, oh, it's Uma Shema v'Shema, like he changed it. So that's why Aval bari bari loy. But if it would be coming with Tainas bari, the din wouldn't be achloiku. That's why Tana Seifa Shema v'Shema in the Seifa it tells the Shema v'Shema Michal the Reisha bari bari to tell you, oh, obviously the Reisha is bari v'bari, because why would the Mishnah say the same thing twice? Even that's bari v'bari. So you do have a right. So the Gemara Tnan, we learned in the Mishnah the big one. The seller says, I sold you a small one, and the buyer says, I bought the big one. So he makes a shvur that he sold the small one, and he only has to give the small one. Lefi Rava who holds that Sumchus whole Chiddush is by Shema v'Shema, but bari Sumchus never said this Chiddush. That's why here when it's bari, the din is no yachloiku, you make a shvur. Ela l'Rabba bar Avhuna the Oma inoma Sumchus afilu bari amai shava moicha yachloiku miboilei. Why in the case over there it says that each one counts with a tainas bari, and we say you make a shvur? Why should you make a shvur? The din should be yachloiku lefi Sumchus. The Gemara moide Sumchus eicha the ikar shvur deraisa. When the Sumchus say that you say yachloiku b'mamon amuter b'sofek, that's when there's no shvur. But in our case, there is the shvur deraisa of moide b'miktas, and in such a case, Sumchus is moide that you make a shvur and you don't say achloiku. And what is shvur in the Mishnah? Says the Gemara, come on, like we're going to say very soon on in the Gemara, and we're going to explain that the Mishnah is talking about by moide b'miktas, and therefore there is the shvur, and therefore Sumchus is moide, they don't say achloiku. It says in the Mishnah, and each one, the seller says it's a small one, I sold it. The buyer says I bought the big one. The Mishnah says he says shvur. On that, the Gemara is going to ask three questions. Say the Gemara, Amai shova, why do you make a shova? When do you say moide b'miktas chai v'shvur? When Reuven comes to Shimon and says you owe me £100, and Shimon agrees to 50, so he agrees on the taina that Reuven tained him only partly, so therefore on the rest he has to make a shvur. But in a case where Reuven comes to Shimon and says, you owe me wheat, and Shimon says, I don't owe you any wheat, I owe you barley. So Shimon never admitted to anything Reuven said. And in that case, it's called moide, it's moide nomi min ataina. And in such a case, it's not normal moide miktas, and you don't make a shvur. So over here, when he's coming and saying, you owe me you sold me a big slave, and he's admitting on a small slave is a whole different item. It's not like money that's partly admitting. He's not admitting whatsoever. So why they make a shvur? And another kasha is, we have in the beginning of Mציעא that heilach, there's a shit that says you know chayav shvur and heilach means that I admit on the 50, but here it is, take it. It's yours wherever it is, I'm giving it to you straight away. So here by Eved, once he admits to the small one, it means it's his wherever it is. Wherever this Eved is. So therefore, you shouldn't be Mechayev Shvur in the case of Heilach. But question number 3, we know they don't make a Shvur on Eved, and here the Mishnah is talking about Eved, then you make a Shvur. So the Gemara is going to answer 4 Turutzim. One of them we're not going to like, but 3 of them fit in. Says the Gemara, Omarav, the first teretz, Betonoi domim, there's a Gersa, Betonoi domi, it's somehow he's claiming the money, the value of a big slave, the value of a big field, not the actual big field, a big slave. Dmei eved godel, dmei eved cotton, dmei sodek toilet, dmei sodek tana, and therefore there's no problem, it's no heilach, it's moide mimina taina, and also you're not making a shvur on avodim. The shvur on a different teretz, Betonoi ksus, it's talking about where he's claiming a ksus of Eved Godel. He's saying, you owe me a jumper size L of Eved Godel, ksus Eved cotton. And the seller says, no, I only sold you a size medium. Omer Sodek Doila, the wheat of a field, a big field. And Omer Sodek Tana, and the seller says, no, it's only a small field, the wheat. And therefore, it's metaltelim. So the Gemara Nomud Beis, ksus, how did he help saying what he said about the cloak? It's again no miminataina, because he's saying you owe me a jumper size L, and he's admitting in a size medium. It's a whole different jumper. He's no moide b'miktas. So the Gemara Kedoma our Papa, like our Papa, is going to say a few lines down the Gemara on a different kasha. So we're going to say the same territory Papa over here. It's Soma B'dialfi, that he's Tivyaim. There's a roll of cloth, and it says, we agreed that you're going to sell me a cloth long enough for a big slave, 1.80 meters. And he says, no, it was only a small slave, 1.60 meters, but it's the same piece of cloth. Depends where you cut it. And therefore, it's moide mimin ataina. Ochinami also here, like our Papa said over there, we can also say here, it's Omar B'dialfi. So that's Rav and Shmuel's teretz. Now, Rav Oishia doesn't like it. So the Gemara, Kasha le Rav Oishia. Midi ksus ktoni, does it say in the Mishnah ksus? Eved ktoni, it says he's claiming a slave, not a ksus. Elo Amar Rav Oishia says the third teretz. Ki goin shetanoi eved b'ksusoi, v'sode b'oimerea. It's somehow Reuven's coming to Shimon and says, you sold me a big slave with a big cloak, with a big jumper, and Shimon says, no, I sold you a small slave with a small jumper. And the reason why you make a shvur is because it's metaltalin, the jumper is metaltalin. And once you make a shvur metaltalin, you also make a shvur in karkrois, it's called zoikikim. So the Gemara Vakati, how does this help? Ksus, he's claiming size L and he's admitting size M. It's a different jumper whatsoever, so it's like claiming wheat and he's admitting barley. Omar Papa, here Papa said it, but the alfi, it's Omat where he's claiming a cloth before it's cut, and therefore he's claiming 180 centimeters, and he says no, 160, so therefore it's like moide b'miktas, it's not like wheat and barley. So, kasha le Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes doesn't like Rav Oish's teretz. He has a kasha on it. What is kasha? Zoikikim also lashminen. What's the chiddush of the Mishnah to tell you that you make a shvur on avodim because you make an karkrois, because you have metaltalim involved? So once you make on avodim, on metaltalim, you also can make a shvur on avodim and karkrois. There's no chiddush. It's on first Mishnah. Tanina, we learned in a Mishnah. Zoikikim anechosim she'enei machrais, es anechosim she'esh leim machrais, lishova aleim. That if you have a shvur because of metaltalim, and there's also a dispute about land, so you can make a shvur on land because you have a shvur on metaltalim. So that's a chiddush of the Mishnah. Elomar of Sheshes, Rav Sheshes says a fourth new teretz. It's talking about how many, who is our Mishnah? Ramei, the Omar Avdik metaltalim domi. He holds, and avodim you do make a shvur. So the Gemara, Vakati he claimed a big slave. He admitted on a small slave. It's a whole different item. It's like chitim on sorim. So the Gemara holds like Ram Gamliel. Then when someone claims wheat and someone admits barley, he's still chayav a shvur. You don't need to be moidem iminatayna. Ditnan, like we learned in the Mishnah, Tana chitim Reuven claimed chitim from Shimon, voido sorim, and Shimon admitted about barley potter because it's not miminatayna. Rav Gamliel mechayev because he holds you don't need miminatayna. So Rav holds Rav Gamliel. So the Gemara, what about the third kasha? Akati heilachu. Very good. The answer. Avodim you don't make a shvon. Avodim Rav holds you do. Yeah, it's not miminatayna because Rav holds even no miminatayna make a shvon. What about heilach? It's used b'chol mokim shem. Amarava avda de kota leyoda v'soda de chofa bober sichumoris. The case of a slave is talking about where Reuben's claiming a big slave. Shimon's admitting to a small slave, but the small slave that he's admitting to, he cut off his hand after the sale happened. Therefore, he owes him money from his own pocket, and since that money is not b'chol mokim shem, it's not heilach. So therefore, there's no heilach. And in the field case, it's talking about that after he sold the field, he dug and made trenches and ruined the fields. He has to pay money from his own pocket, and therefore it's no heilach. Says the Gemara, you telling me that Rameh holds avodim, you make a shvur. I'll bring you right. Rameh holds you don't make a shvur on avodim. Or the Eved is like karka. Ditnan, we learned in the Mishnah, Goza be'im of his skin, or someone stole the animal and it became old, And now the question is, could he give back this old animal, or can he, does he have to pay like when he stole it, a young animal? So that everyone admits to that because of the shinui became old, and metaltelim and niknem b'shinui, so therefore you have to pay the value that was b'shas hagneva, because the shinui that happened made this animal become the ganev. So Golva Beima v'eskino, now another case, in the Mishnah Avodim v'eskino, a slave, and he became old, mishalim k'shas hagzela, because Tanekama Chachomim hold that even a Eved is like a Beima, it's like metaltelim, and you're koine b'shinui, and it's not like karka that you can't be koine b'shinui, and therefgle you have to pay k'shas hagzela. Rameir argues, he says, ba'avodim, by slaves, no, because the Eved's like karka, and like karka is not nikne sorry, you can't do a shinui, and you can do a seirishel cholofanecha, it's yours wherever it is. Eved's like karka, and therefore you could seirishel cholofanecha. So what do we see? What does Rameir hold? The Eved's like karka, and we're saying the Eved's not like karka. So the Gemara holoi kasha. That's not kasha. Kedemachli for Rabba Baravua v'Toni. Rabba Baravua explains the mission of the opposite. Rameir ima mishalim k'shas hagzela, because Rameir holds avodim like metaltelim, and that fits in very good with what we're saying that our mission is Rameir. They make a shvur on avodim. Because it's like karka, and Chacham is the one who holds Eved like karka, but Rameir holds Eved like metaltelim. So the Gemara, I'll tell you a different question. Okay, very good. You can make a shvur on Eved and the Mishnah of Rameir, but there's another case in the Mishnah. The other case of the Mishnah is talking about the field, and by the field, you also make a shvur, it says the Mishnah. So very good. By Eved you make a shvur, but what also karkas like Eved that you can make a shvur on if you're a male. Elo, says the Gemara, let's see inside. Elo mimai, I'll tell you a different kasha. Mimai this over Rameir. How do you know that Rameir holds makshin karka le'Eved to say that karka has the same din like Eved? Ma Eved nishboim, like we make a shvur on Eved if you're a male. Af karka nishboim, also in the case of the field in the Mishnah you make a shvur. Maybe Dilma, a Eved udin nishboim, on Eved you can make a shvur. Avol a karka loy, even though the Rameir says a big chiddush that you can make a shvur on a karka, on Eved, but on karka he never said such a big chiddush, and therefore how are you going to explain me the case of karka in the Mishnah? Tell the Gemara, lo sal kedaitoch the Tanya. I'll bring you a Aryeh from the Brisa that even on karka Rameir holds you make a shvur. Because it says in the Brisa, machli por bechamor, someone who swapped a cow for donkey v'yoldo, and had a baby v'china moichish v'chotz v'yoldo, and so on. The same if someone sold his woman slave and he had a baby, the buyer says the baby was born after I bought it, and the seller says keeps quiet, he keeps the baby. The seller and the buyer don't know, they split. If they both argue, the seller says it was born before the transaction and the buyer says it was born after the transaction, the moicha makes a shvur. That the baby was born before the transaction and he keeps it. And why does he make a shvur? Maybe the buyer should make a shvur that was born after the transaction and he should get it. Lefi says the Brisa, shekola nishboim shvatorah, all the people in the Torah make a shvur, nishboim v'lo nishalmin, they make a shvur and they don't. It's the one who's sued, he makes a shvur and he doesn't pay, not the one who's suing makes a shvur and takes. Divrei Rameir, that's a shit of Rameir. No, you can't make a shvur. Lo al avodim, not an avodim, v'lo al karkois, and not on fields, even though that the Brisa never spoke about fields. So it says the Gemara diuk, lav michlal, isn't it that from here we could hear that Rameir sovan ishboim? Since Chacham say no, you don't make a shvur, no on karka, no on avodim. Mashma the Rameir holds you do make a shvur, also karka and also avodim. So it fits in very good. Our Mishnah's Rameir, and even on karka you make a shvur. So the Gemara, no, that's not right. I mean, how do you know that? Dilma kishem kormulei. They said like, meaning Ki'echi, like doidisloin b'karkois, like you admit us the karka, they don't make a shvur on karka. Oidilan ba'avodim, admit us also avodim ukshula karkois. How could you make a shvur on a Eved? Really, Rameir admits on karka you don't make a shvur. So there's no raya from the Brisa that Rameir holds that on karka you could make a shvur. Teida says the Gemara, bring you a raya that Rameir hold on karka you don't make a shvur, only, and you could only say it on avodim. It says in the Mishnah, Rameir oima. יש דברים שהם כקרקע ואינם כקרקע. There's some things that are like land, but they're not land. ואין חכמים מועידו לו, אין חכמים do not admit to him. כיצד, what's the case? יוד כפונים תאונוס, מסרתי לך Reuven comes to Shimon and says, I gave you 10 grape trees full of grapes. And Shimon says, Eino melech chomesh, you only gave me 5. So Rameh says you have to make a shvua. He's a moide b'miktas v'chomer and kol ha'mechub b'lakarka. Anything that's connected to the ground, like these grapes. Aryeh karka has a thing like karka, and like any karka, you don't make a shvua. V'omer Rabbi Yosi bar Chanina, the machlokes between Rameh and Chachamim is talking about a novim ha'oimdus libotza ikibinai. The whole machlokes is when the grapes are ready to be cut off the tree. The mass of Rabbi Meir, who says you make a shvur keptzuras damyan, is that if it's cut already off the tree and therefore it's like metaltalim and therefore you make a shvur because the moed miktas on metaltalim. Mass of and chachamim wog, you say lav keptzuras damyan, they're still connected to the tree. Not that they're ready to be cut off. Doesn't mean anything. They're still connected to the tree. It's considered land, and you don't make a shvur on land. So we can see clearly that the whole machlokes is because it's ready to be cut off the tree. But if we talk about actual land, Rameh admits that you don't make a shvur. So what's pshat in our Mishnah that you say that you do make a shvur also on land? Hello, says the Gemara, really, we're going to go back to teretz number 3 that's talking about ksus, a cloak together with an eved, or morin together with a field. Oh, and we had a kash on that. What's the chiddush to tell you they make a shvur on karka once you have a shvur on metaltalim? We know that's in first Mishnah. I'll tell you a teretz on that. Salke daito chamina. I might have thought ksut eved ke'eved dami. Omre sadeh ke'sadeh dami. I might have thought that a cloak of a slave. Since I'm claiming the slave and the cloak, so we don't look at the cloak. It's not important. We look at the slave, and therefore a slave is like something you don't make a shvur, and you don't make a shvur. And also the land together with the wheat. The main thing is the land, and therefore you don't make a shvur because the metaltalim are not relevant. Kumash malon, that's the chiddush. No, you look at the cloak by itself and the eved by itself. You look at the imorim by itself and the field by itself. And since that's metaltalim, you make a shvur. And once you make a shvur, you also make a shvur on karkos. And that's the chiddush of the Mishnah that we didn't know from the Mishnah of Zoikikim. We went into the Mishnah, and in the case of the dispute, and they both don't know, you split it. Tzedek Homani, who is our Mishnah? Sumchusi. It's Shita Sumchus, the Oma Moma Namuta Basafek Choykim, who says that when you have a dispute of money and you don't know who it belongs to, so you split. Ema Seifa, let's look at the Seifa in the Mishnah. They both claim that it belongs to them. The buyer and the seller, Yishava Moicha. The Moicha makes a shvur shebershusa yoldo that he was born in his possession, and his potter, he keeps the baby. Ulurabba barav huna nomod aleph, the Omar who said in Omar sumchus afilu bari, who says that sumchus also spoke, even in a case where they both coming with a tainas bari with saying, I know what happened, and afilu achi say yachloiku amai shava moicha. Why is the din that the moicha makes a shvur? Yachloiku mi boye, the din should split, since they both, even in a case where they both know they coming with a tainas bari, the din is yachloiku, so the din should be yachloiku. Why they make a shvur? So the Gemara, moide sumchus eicha deika shvur deraisa. Sumchus, even sumchus who says mama namuta basaf choykin, that's when there's no shvur deraisa involved. But in our case, there's a shvur deraisa involved. What's a shvur deraisa? Why the olachur teilach? And we had the other shaylas, and that the Gemara says, but the kotel yodik the Rava. Like Rava said on the top of this page, that it's somehow where it's no hilach because the hand's cut off and he has to pay money from his own pocket. It's also over here, it's somehow when the hand's cut off. And that's why it's no halach. And Rashi explains, all her it's no mimina taina. He says, no, when he's claiming a slave together with the baby, it's considered one thing. And he admits only on the slave and on the baby, it's considered one thing. It's not considered like wheat and barley. And all the other question, you don't make a shvur on avodim. No, it's Rameh who says you do make a shvur on avodim. Thank you very much.